Listen, can you hear the rain on the glass? That was the last sound from Eleanor Vance's room before she vanished from inside it, locked from within. For 17 years, everyone praised her sister's relentless search for the monster who took her. But what if the story isn't about a monster, but an escape? Some mysteries don't fade with time. They sink their claws into the bedrock of a place and refuse to let go. They become folklore, cautionary tales whispered to children, a persistent, haunting question that settles over a community like the dense coastal fog. In the small, windswept town of Port Blossom, Washington, that question has lingered for 17 years. Before we dive into the silence that began that October afternoon, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below and help us in our mission to make sure no name stays forgotten. The name that hangs in the sea mist of Port Blossom is Eleanor Vance. She was 19, an artist whose talent was a wildfire in a town of damp kindling, a quiet girl with eyes the color of a Pacific storm just before it breaks. Her world was her second-story bedroom in the old Victorian her family had owned for generations. It was a sanctuary of turpentine and charcoal dust, a place where canvases leaned against every wall, vibrant and chaotic scenes wrestling with something just beyond the frame. On a Tuesday afternoon, with a cold autumn rain beating a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the windows, she vanished. This wasn't a disappearance from a dark alley or a lonely stretch of highway. It was an impossible act. She vanished from inside a room that was locked from the within. No scream, no sign of a struggle, no sound. Just gone. The silence that began in that room would become the most haunting sound Port Blossom had ever known. Her older sister, Clara, was the one who finally broke the silence. She had returned home from the local library, a stack of books under her arm, calling Eleanor's name. When no one answered, she climbed the creaking stairs and found the bedroom door locked. A simple deadbolt, the kind you turn from the inside. After minutes of knocking turned to frantic pounding, her father broke the door down. They found an empty room. The air was still, heavy with the smell of oil paints and damp wood. A half-finished painting sat on its easel, the colors still wet. Her favorite sweater was draped over a chair. The single tall window was painted shut, sealed against the corrosive sea air for as long as anyone could remember. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the air. For 17 years, that impossible, silent room was all her family and especially Clara had left of her. A void, an unanswered question made of wood and plaster. A silence that stretched for 6,205 days, until one day, hundreds of miles away in a different state, a retiring bookseller decided it was finally time to clear out his dusty attic. He had no idea that a forgotten box of journals sealed with brittle tape would not just answer the question of Port Blossom, but shatter it into 1,000 terrifying pieces. What he found would prove that the truth we seek is often a carefully constructed lie, and the monster we fear is sometimes the one leading the search. Stay with me, because what was written in those pages will rewrite everything you think you know about the girl who disappeared. To understand an absence, you must first understand the person who left it. But in the case of Eleanor Vance, the portrait of the victim was painted by a single artist, her sister, Clara. In the weeks and months that followed the vanishing, as the town reeled from the impossible crime, Clara became its stoic center. She was 5 years older, a woman who seemed carved from the same coastal rock as Port Blossom itself. Practical, steady, and fiercely protective. It was Clara who sat for hours in the sterile interview rooms of the police station, her voice a low, steady monotone, never breaking as she described the sister she had lost. The Eleanor she painted for them was a creature of immense talent and devastating fragility. A brilliant creator who felt the world too keenly, a soul without the armor needed to survive it. Clara spoke of how Eleanor would lose herself for hours in her art, mixing paints until her hands became a constant, shifting canvas of color. She described her sister as painfully shy, almost reclusive, finding solace not in the company of people, but in the dramatic, brooding landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. She had few friends, Clara explained, because she found it difficult to connect with a world that didn't understand her. She led the detectives through Eleanor's room, now a sealed crime scene. She showed them the vibrant, chaotic canvases, pointing out the dark, unsettling shapes that seemed to wrestle with something just beyond the frame. She was trying to paint her feelings, Clara would say, her expression one of profound sadness. She just didn't have the words. She showed them Eleanor's poetry, journals filled with elegant, looping script that spoke of cages and broken wings, of a deep desire for flight. Every piece of evidence she presented reinforced the same narrative. She was my responsibility, Clara told the lead detective, her gaze unwavering, her hands clenched in her lap. I was supposed to keep her safe from all of this. The portrait was complete. It was a picture of a delicate, beautiful bird, one that needed a strong cage to protect it from the storm. And everyone in Port Blossom, from the police chief to the neighbors who watched Clara's tireless grief from their windows, believed it. They saw her strength, her unwavering resolve, and they saw a woman broken by the failure to protect the one person she loved most. It was a story of tragic, profound love. But every portrait only shows one side of the face, the side the artist chooses to illuminate. The shadows, they learned much later, held a completely different story. The initial investigation was a study in frustration, a collision of modern forensic science with a seemingly impossible, almost supernatural event. The facts were stark and unyielding. The bedroom door had been secured from the inside with a heavy deadbolt, and the key was still in the lock, undisturbed. The single, tall window, its frame swollen with decades of sea air, was painted shut with layers of enamel so thick it would have taken a crowbar and significant effort to open. There were no hidden passages, no scuff marks on the old-growth fir floorboards, no fibers caught on the window sash that would indicate a struggle or an escape. Eleanor Vance had, for all intents and purposes, evaporated into thin air. The Port Blossom Police Department, a small force more accustomed to fishing disputes and summer tourist traffic, was immediately and completely overwhelmed. They called in the Washington State Patrol, who brought in their top crime scene unit. State investigators dusted for prints, analyzed the air for trace chemicals, and combed every inch of the room. The results were always the same. Nothing. Nothing was out of place, save for the person who was supposed to be there. Search and rescue teams, accompanied by cadaver dogs, swept the jagged cliffs and dense, fern-choked forests that surrounded the town. For days, the dogs searched, their handlers calling out Eleanor's name until their voices were hoarse. The dogs found nothing. The case file grew thick with negatives, a testament to an absence of evidence. No signs of forced entry, no ransom note, no credible witnesses who saw anything unusual that rainy afternoon. In the void left by the lack of facts, Clara Vance became the investigation's relentless engine. She was a constant presence at the police station, her grief a tangible force that spurred the detectives on. She organized volunteer search parties that combed the same woods again and again. She designed and printed thousands of flyers. her sister's stormy eyes staring out from telephone poles and grocery store bulletin boards across the state. She sat through hundreds of hours of interviews, her memory for detail sharp and unforgiving. As days turned into weeks and weeks bled into years, the official investigation wound down. Leads dried up. The state investigators packed their equipment and returned to Olympia. The case faded from the headlines into local lore, another tragic mystery swallowed by the forest and the fog. Eventually, the file was stamped with 3 words that felt like a final betrayal: cold case file. Officially open, but practically forgotten by everyone except the woman who refused to let it die. For Clara, the case was never cold. It was a fire that burned away her old life, leaving only the ashes of a single obsessive question: what happened to Eleanor? 17 years is a long time to hold your breath. For Clara Vance, life didn't move forward after that rainy October afternoon. It simply stopped. Her job as a librarian at the Port Blossom Public Library, a place she had once loved, became a distant memory. She took an indefinite leave of absence that became permanent. Friendships, untended, withered under the deep, singular shadow of her focus. The Vance family home, a beautiful but decaying Victorian that groaned in the sea wind, was transformed. It was no longer a home where a family lived and grieved. It became a headquarters, a museum of absence. The living room wall, once covered in family portraits, was now a sprawling, chaotic collage of maps, timelines, and photographs of Eleanor. Red string connected pins across topographical maps of the Olympic Peninsula. Timelines detailed every known movement from her last day. It was the physical manifestation of a case the police had long since abandoned. A cold case file brought to painful, obsessive life. Clara's days fell into a rigid, monastic routine. She spent her mornings combing through the original police files, copies of which she'd fought for years to obtain. Her afternoons were spent in the library, not as a librarian, but as a researcher, devouring books on unsolved crimes. Her nights were a descent into the digital abyss, chasing down anonymous tips from internet forums dedicated to cold cases. She became a self-taught expert in fields she'd never imagined. She learned forensic linguistics to analyze Eleanor's poetry for hidden codes and secret meanings. She studied cases of disappearance without a trace, looking for patterns, for echoes of her own family's tragedy. Her hope became a stubborn, flickering candle against the relentless gale of passing years. In Port Blossom, Clara Vance became a local legend, a figure of both pity and admiration. The grieving sister who simply refused to let go. To the outside world, it was a profound act of love and devotion. It was the story of the unwavering seeker, a testament to the moral force of perseverance in the face of unbearable loss. Her vigil was public, her grief a constant shared burden that the town carried with her. Documentaries were made about her tireless search. News articles were written on the anniversaries of the disappearance, always featuring a quote from Clara, her voice steady, her resolve unbroken. But obsession is a mirror, and what it reflects back depends entirely on the angle of the light. From one angle, you see a saint. From another, you see something else entirely. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, even after 17 years buried under silence. It rarely appears where you expect it. It doesn't rise from the cold, hard ground of a crime scene, but from the forgotten corners of everyday life. This is the accidental breakthrough. Far from the rain-soaked coast of Washington, in a quiet, sun-drenched town in southern Oregon, a man named Arthur Pinter was retiring. For 40 years, he had run The Last Page, a small, beloved bookstore filled with the scent of aging paper and freshly brewed tea. His final task, before handing the keys to a new owner, was to clear out the attic, a dusty, sun-baked repository of donated books he never quite had the time to sort through. In a far corner, behind the stack of water-stained encyclopedias, he found a simple cardboard box. It was sealed with brittle, yellowed packing tape. There was no name, no address, no indication of its origin. Curious, Arthur slit the tape with a penknife. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, were 5 simple black Moleskine journals. He opened one. The handwriting inside was elegant but frantic. The ink bled slightly in places, as if the writer was pressing too hard. The words spoke of the sea, of the suffocating weight of fog, of a constant, unnerving feeling of being watched. They spoke of a desperate need for escape. It was compelling, poetic, and deeply sad. Arthur sat on a dusty crate, lost in the anonymous author's world. He was halfway through the 3rd journal when he reached an entry dated just 1 month before Eleanor Vance's disappearance. The entry described a town called Port Blossom in visceral detail. And then he read a line that made the hair on his arms stand up. The writer described a sister who loved like a storm, beautiful and devastating, leaving no room to breathe. His blood ran cold. Arthur Pinter, like millions of others, had seen the documentaries. He had read the articles about the unwavering sister, the tragic disappearance from the locked room. He closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. He walked down the creaking attic stairs, picked up the phone, and called the Washington State Police Cold Case Division. He explained, his voice quiet but firm, that he thought he had just found a voice that had been silent for 17 years. And with that single accidental act, the entire foundation of the Port Blossom mystery began to crack. Detective Miles Corbin was new to the Cold Case Unit, a place where stories went to die. He was young enough not to be entirely jaded by the job, but he'd been a cop long enough to know that secrets have a long half-life. He drove the 3 hours south to Oregon himself, taking official possession of the 5 black journals from the bewildered bookseller. Back in his sterile, fluorescent-lit office, surrounded by the ghosts of other forgotten cases, he began to read. He expected a story of fear. He anticipated the words of a terrified young woman, perhaps documenting a stalker, chronicling a growing dread before an inevitable abduction. He found something far more chilling. The Eleanor Vance who emerged from those pages was not the fragile bird from Clara's carefully crafted portrait. She was a brilliant, meticulous strategist. The journals were not a record of fear. They were a detailed, brilliantly conceived escape plan. In page after page of elegant, forceful script, she wrote of suffocating under what she called Clara's loving surveillance. Her protection, Eleanor wrote, felt like a prison. Clara, she claimed, went through her mail, listened in on her phone calls, and subtly but effectively sabotaged any friendship that became too close, always under the guise of concern for Eleanor's delicate nature. The devastating reveal came in a single heartbreaking passage. The chaotic paintings weren't about some abstract internal darkness. They were literal depictions of her life with Clara. The poems about cages were not metaphors. Eleanor described how, for months, she had secretly practiced how to manipulate the old finicky locking mechanism on her bedroom door, learning to jimmy it in a way that would allow it to be locked from the outside while appearing to be bolted from within. She detailed how she had carefully loosened the floorboards in the back of her closet, creating a small crawl space that led to a little-used, sealed-off section of the old house. Every word. Read. Contextualize the crime scene. The locked room wasn't a mystery. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. The painted shut window wasn't a barrier. It was part of the stage. The truth was so much worse than a simple abduction. Because monsters aren't just found in basements or lurking in the shadows of a dark street. Sometimes they live in kitchens. Sometimes they tuck you in at night. The monster in Eleanor's story wasn't a stranger. It was the person everyone in Port Blossom considered a saint. Detective Corbin knew he was walking into a minefield. An accusation this explosive against a woman who had become a national symbol of devotion and grief had to be handled with surgical precision. He drove the winding coastal highway back to Port Blossom, the gray sea churning beside him, and went to the Vance house. He sat with Clara in the living room that had become a shrine to her sister, the wall of maps and photos a silent testament to her 17-year vigil. She looked older than her years, her face a carefully composed mask of weary resolve. Corbin started gently, asking her to recount the early days of the search, a story she had told 1,000 times. She did so with the practiced, somber precision of a eulogy. Her voice was steady, her pain palpable. Then he took out a photocopied page from one of the journals. He laid it on the coffee table between them. "Does this handwriting look familiar to you?" he asked, his voice quiet. Clara leaned forward, her breath caught. "It's Eleanor's," she whispered, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "Where did you find this? Is there more?" Corbin didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he read a single passage aloud from the page. "Clara's love is a blanket I can't breathe under. She tells me the world is dangerous, but the only danger I've ever known lives in this house." The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of grief did not just crack, it shattered. It was replaced by a cold, sharp fury that seemed to radiate from her. "That's a lie," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Someone forged this. Someone is trying to poison her memory, to poison what we had." Her grief, which had seemed so profound moments before, evaporated, replaced by pure rage. She launched into a tirade, accusing Corbin of incompetence, of cruelty, of desecrating her sister's memory with forged documents from some sick, anonymous source. She was formidable, her anger a powerful shield. But as she raged, Corbin saw it. He saw past the performance. In the tightening of her jaw, in the possessive glint in her eyes, he saw the flicker of absolute, suffocating control that Eleanor had described. Every answer was like a knife of fog. You could feel the edge, but not see it. And in that moment, the unwavering seeker, the sainted sister, looked for the very first time like a cornered predator. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that everything Eleanor had written was true. The journals gave Detective Corbin more than just a motive. They provided a second name, a ghost in the narrative who had never once appeared in the original 17-year-old case file. His name was Julian Croft. He had been a visiting literature professor at the small community college where Eleanor had been taking a night class in poetry. The original investigators had missed him entirely. In her journals, Eleanor described him not as a predator or a groomer, but as a confidant, the very first person in her life who saw her not as fragile, but as strong. He was the one who listened when she spoke of her gilded cage. He was the one who believed her. And ultimately, he was the one who agreed to help her disappear. He was her co-conspirator. Corbin immediately ran the name. The results were both illuminating and frustrating. Julian Croft had resigned his teaching position abruptly just 1 week after Eleanor vanished, citing a sudden family emergency back east. He had no criminal record, no outstanding warrants. But after that date, his digital footprint, his entire official existence simply ended. No new driver's license, no tax records, no credit history. He had become a ghost. He was a man built for disappearance, and he had used that gift with terrifying precision. Corbin's team dug into Croft's former life in Port Blossom. They found the old off-campus apartment he had rented, a small unit above a fish market that still smelled faintly of the sea. The apartment had been empty for years, but in a stroke of luck, the landlord had never thrown out an old desktop computer tower left in a closet. A forensic sweep of the corroded hard drive was a long shot, but it paid off. Deep within the fragmented data, the technicians found traces of encrypted emails exchanged with an anonymous account. It took them 2 days to break the encryption. The decoded messages were a revelation. They were from Eleanor, sent from a burner account in the weeks leading up to her escape. They spoke of a new life, a new identity waiting for her. They detailed the final logistics of her plan. But the last email, sent just 2 days before she disappeared, contained something else. It was a final, desperate, and brilliant strategy. A plan designed to do more than just help her escape. It was a plan to ensure that Clara, with her relentless, obsessive need to search, would never, ever find her. Just as Detective Corbin felt he was on the verge of a real breakthrough, a way to track the 2 ghosts who had vanished 17 years ago, the case took a bizarre and dramatic public turn. A padded envelope with no return address arrived at the front desk of a major Seattle news station. Inside was a small USB drive and a single typewritten letter. The letter was a confession, signed at the bottom in a shaky hand. Julian Croft. In chillingly direct prose, the letter admitted to a secret, obsessive relationship with Eleanor's aunts. It claimed he had lured her from her home that October afternoon, held her captive for several months in a remote cabin, and then killed her in a fit of rage when she tried to escape. He expressed deep, gut-wrenching remorse for his crimes and for the pain he had caused the Vance family. And then came the part that turned the story from a cold case into a national headline. He provided the exact GPS coordinates in the heart of the Olympic National Forest, where, he claimed, he had buried Eleanor's body 17 years ago. The USB drive contained a short, grainy video, clearly filmed on a cheap webcam. It showed a man who looked like a much older, haunted version of Julian Croft. His face gaunt, his eyes wide with fear. Looking directly into the camera, he confessed to everything written in the letter. He looked terrified, a man at the absolute end of his rope. His final words on the video, before the screen went black, were a desperate plea. Let this be the end. Just let her rest. The media exploded. Within hours, the story was everywhere. The impossible locked room mystery that had baffled investigators and captivated the public for nearly 2 decades had a name, a face, and a confession. The narrative was simple, tragic, and horrifyingly believable. A brilliant young artist manipulated and ultimately murdered by her obsessive college professor. After 17 years of silence, it seemed the mystery of what happened to Eleanor Vance was, at long last, solved. Every major news network led with the story, praising the tireless 17-year search of a sister who had never ever given up hope. The discovery was swift and definitive. A team of state investigators, guided by the GPS coordinates from Julian Croft's confession, followed a series of old logging roads deep into the dense, moss-covered temperate rainforest of the Olympic Peninsula. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and cedar. Using ground-penetrating radar, they scanned the area described in the letter. Within an hour, they found it. A clear disturbance in the soil, roughly 6 feet down. The excavation began immediately. 2 hours of careful, painstaking digging through roots and rock unearthed human remains. The skeleton was largely intact, consistent with that of a young woman of Eleanor's age and height. And there, tangled in the dirt near the skull, was the totem of memory that sealed the case. It was a small silver locket, tarnished and green with age. It was the very same locket Clara Vance had described to police in meticulous detail 17 years ago. A one-of-a-kind piece Eleanor's grandmother had given her, with a tiny, distinctive sailboat engraved on the front. It was irrefutable. The local coroner's office, with the state crime lab in Seattle expediting the results, confirmed the inevitable. Dental records, compared against Eleanor's childhood X-rays, were a perfect match. A DNA profile extracted from a molar confirmed the remains belonged to Eleanor Vance. The long, silent years of not knowing were finally over. The case was officially closed. A warrant was issued for the arrest of Julian Croft for the kidnapping and murder of Eleanor Vance, though he was nowhere to be found. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But it had come late, a verdict carved from stone and sorrow. Clara Vance held a press conference on the steps of her family home, surrounded by a sea of cameras and microphones. She looked exhausted, but relieved. "She can finally be at peace," Clara said, her voice choked with an emotion that sounded like a victory, but looked exactly like defeat. "Now we can finally bring her home." The unwavering seeker had completed her quest. The story had its tragic but conclusive end. For everyone else in the world, the story was over. For Miles Corbin, sitting alone in his office late at night, it was a discordant screaming note that wouldn't leave his head. The confession was too clean. The discovery too simple. The timing was too perfect, arriving just as he was closing in. Why would Julian Croft, after hiding his tracks and successfully becoming a ghost for 17 years, suddenly confess and provide a perfect, flawless map to the body? It didn't make sense. He went back to the source. He opened the last of the 5 journals, the one containing the entries from the final weeks before Eleanor's disappearance. He read through them again, slowly this time, looking for the detail he had missed. And then he found it. It was a passage he had skimmed over before, a quote Eleanor had copied down from a novel she had been reading. It read, "The best lie is not the one that is vague, but the one that is meticulously detailed." His heart started to pound. He turned the page. He read her final dated entry, written the night before she vanished. The handwriting was tight, controlled, the words chosen with the precision of a surgeon. "I have to give her a body," it began. "It's the only way she'll ever stop looking for me. I can't just disappear. I have to die. I have to write an ending to my own story. A tragic, believable ending that the world will accept. It is a terrible thing to do, to use another's tragedy for my own freedom. But it is better than the alternative. To be truly free, Eleanor Vance has to die." Corbin felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the cold Washington rain beating against his office window. The body in the woods, the perfectly placed locket, the terrified, videotaped confession from a man who knew he was sacrificing his name forever. It was all a fabrication, a grand, final, heartbreaking act of misdirection. He realized with sickening clarity what they had done. Eleanor and Julian had found an unclaimed body, a Jane Doe from a county morgue somewhere, a forgotten soul with no name and no one to search for her. They had planted the evidence, created a story so complete, so tragic, and so final that the entire world, and most importantly Clara, would stop searching. It wasn't a confession. It was an ending, written in someone else's bones. Miles Corbin sat in his unmarked car, parked on a windswept bluff overlooking the churning gray waters of the Pacific, not far from Port Blossom. He held the last of Eleanor's journals in his hands, its pages filled with a story that only he now knew. The official case file on Eleanor Vance was closed. The truth was now enshrined in public record and newspaper archives. Eleanor was the tragic victim of an obsessive killer. Her sister, Clara, was the devoted, heartbroken seeker who had finally found her peace. It was a neat, tragic, satisfying story. And it was a complete lie. Corbin knew the real truth. He knew that Eleanor was alive somewhere out there, under a new name, living a life she had fought desperately to claim. He knew that her real prison had not been some hidden basement or remote cabin, but the suffocating confines of her own childhood home. He looked down at the open journal, at the story of a young woman who had to orchestrate her own murder to escape the person who claimed to love her most. What is the role of a detective, he wondered, when the truth is more damaging than the lie? When justice for one person means destroying the fragile peace of another? His job was to find the lost. His mission, the guiding principle of this chronicle, is to ensure no name stays forgotten. But for the very first time, he wondered if the real justice, the truest act of empathy, was not to uncover a name, but to let one go. To allow it to be carried away on the wind, erased from all official records, forgotten by everyone, so that the person who once wore it could finally, truly be free. Was it his job to give Clara the real ending to her story, or to give Eleanor the beginning of hers? He closed the journal. He could reopen the case. He could launch a nationwide search for a Jane Doe whose body was used in a conspiracy. He could expose Clara, though no crime had technically been committed that could be prosecuted. He could hunt for Julian and Eleanor. He could tell the truth. But what would that truth accomplish? He started the car, the engine a quiet rumble against the sound of the waves crashing below. He drove away from the sea, leaving the official story, the beautiful, tragic lie, completely undisturbed. Some mysteries, he realized, don't end with handcuffs or courtroom confessions. They end in silence. They end with a choice. The story of Eleanor Vance is officially closed, a settled piece of local history. But it leaves behind a question that echoes long after the facts are filed away. Did Detective Corbin make the right choice? Is there a difference between legal justice and moral justice? And what is the true cost of freedom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching Deep End Stories. Our mission is to uncover the stories they tried to bury and ensure that no name stays forgotten. But today's story asks if sometimes the greatest act of remembrance is to allow a name to be set free. If you believe these stories matter, don't forget to subscribe to Deep End Stories and hit the notification bell. Well, we'll see you in the next investigation.